Forget everything you think you know about visitors from other planets. Thomas Blackwood, alone in Wyoming, braved the cold and silence of a night that should have been ordinary. But it wasn't. Something descended from the sky, bright and shocking, and the moment he realized who was before him, his life changed forever. He came here with an authority that transcends galaxies and centuries. This is the story of the figure who presented himself to Thomas in the midst of darkness with the most impossible declaration of all. I have been sent by Jesus. The question is, did he come to save or to announce the end? Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea or just some water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Now, let's get to the story. The night was so dark that Thomas Blackwood could barely see his own hand in front of his face. December, in Wyoming, is like that. Too quiet, too cold, and too empty for someone still learning to live alone. 14 years a widower, and some nights still felt like the first. He was in the barn, always in the barn at these times, the place where things make sense, where there's movement, life, purpose. His pregnant cows rested in the straw, and 3 newborn calves slept next to their mothers. Tom had gone 72 hours without proper sleep, worried that any of them wouldn't survive another night of extreme cold. No one warns you when you reach 59 that loneliness becomes a companion as constant as the wind whistling through the farmhouse boards. He moved among the animals with the precision of someone who'd repeated this gesture 1,000,000 times. He added hay, checked water, gently palpated the newborns to ensure they were breathing. Ritual, repetition, a minor purpose, but a purpose. It was all that remained. So, listen. It wasn't a normal sound. It wasn't wind or animal or anything Tom's rational mind could catalog in the first few seconds. It was as if the air had ripped, a low, vibrating hum that Tom felt first in his ribs before hearing it with his ears. The calves started. The cows shifted restlessly, and Tom froze. His heart raced. He stepped out of the barn as if something invisible had pushed him. The night swallowed him instantly, that biting Wyoming cold in December, the kind of cold that literally burns exposed skin. But Tom didn't feel it. His body was somewhere else, operated by something older than reason. Above the pasture, near the trees that marked the western boundary of his property, were lights. They weren't stars. Tom knew every constellation visible from this spot on the farm. He knew them because he'd spent 365 nights each year looking at them for 14 years. These lights were different, pulsating, blue, green, with a glow that reflected nothing. It emitted. They descended slowly as if the air offered resistance, as if something extremely heavy were being lowered with extreme care. The buzzing got louder. Tom could feel every fiber of his being screaming at him to run. Run to the barn, lock the door, call the sheriff, call someone, anyone. 59 years ago, his mind had been programmed by Methodist sermons, TV news, science fiction movies, and barroom conversations to recognize such a moment as dangerous. Aliens don't exist except as threats. Aliens wouldn't descend from the sky on an isolated Wyoming ranch, except to invade, experiment, and destroy. But something inside Thomas Blackwood, something so deep it had no name, something he had never consciously acknowledged, refused to obey. He walked towards the light. The frozen grass cracked beneath his feet with a sound like crunching glass. The bitter desert wind whipped at his face and tears began to stream down his face. Not from fear, not yet, but from something he would later be unable to describe. Confusion, recognition, as if he were walking towards something he had always known, but had spent 59 years pretending he didn't. The lights came down closer. Now he could see something more. It wasn't just light. There was form. There was dimension. There was something there that his rational mind refused to accept as real. But his body, his ancestral body, his body that carried more memory than his conscious mind, recognized. The hum changed frequency, no longer a machine-like sound. Now it was as if the air itself had gained a voice. And in that instant, Thomas Blackwood realized he had crossed an invisible threshold. That everything that came after, every choice, every word, every moment of his remaining life, would be divided into before this and after this. He still didn't know why. He still didn't know what it was, but his body knew it would never be the same. Thomas Blackwood woke up every day knowing exactly what awaited him. Or rather, he woke up when he could sleep, knowing nothing awaited him. No one would call, no one would visit, no letters would arrive in the mail except bills and advertisements. His world had shrunk to the size of a Wyoming estate, and for 14 years it had functioned that way. 59 years old, widowed for 14 years, a farmer by profession and for lack of alternatives. Elizabeth's death on an ordinary day in March, a car accident so banal, so unfairly common, had fractured something in Thomas that no amount of time could mend. It wasn't classic depression. It was something quieter. It was emptiness. The farm was 125 acres, but Tom rarely explored more than 10. His world had become a repetitive circuit. Barn, stable, cattle pen, house, bed, repeat every day, every year. 14 years of the same pattern, the same silence, the same absence. Financial life was stable but fragile. Cattle prices fluctuated. Drought struck without warning. His savings, which would seem robust to a single man, dwindled steadily. The banks called regularly, not yet in a threatening tone. But Tom recognized the tone. He had heard his parents discuss debt as a child. He knew how this cycle began. He knew how it ended, too. 2 years ago, a bad investment, breeding Arabian horses based on a neighbor's advice, had drained half his savings in months. The horses didn't sell as promised. The market shifted. The expenses continued. And now in October, as the first frosts arrived in Wyoming, Tom was mentally calculating whether he could hold on to the property until next spring. He had stopped counting the beads. But the financial crisis was just the symptom. The real problem was something no bank could solve. In his nights alone, and there were many nights alone, Thomas Blackwood had begun to question things he should have accepted 59 years ago without question. His mother had raised him Methodist. His wife was Methodist. His entire life had been an environment where answers came ready-made in a book, on a pulpit, in sermons repeated in the same old tone. God created humans in His image. Everything you need to know is on that page. Have faith. Don't question. But Elizabeth had died. Elizabeth had prayed every day. She had unwavering faith. She attended church. She helped widows. She sowed in her own life what she would reap in eternity, as the pastor said. And on an ordinary day in March, on an ordinary bend in an ordinary road, that faith didn't save her. That life of piety didn't protect her. Thomas had gone to the funeral. He had heard the pastor talk about mysterious divine plans. And God knows what He does, and something inside him, something that had lain dormant for 56 years, had awakened with anger. After the funeral, he had stopped going to church. Not dramatically, not confrontationally. He simply stopped going, and no one from the Methodist community had actually come looking for him. Some called, some visited, but after 3 months, silence fell. And no one calls again when you subtly make it clear that you don't want to be found. In the solitude of the farm, Tom began to think, really think, if God is as great as they claim, if He is omniscient, omnipotent, creator of all, why would He create only this small planet called Earth? Why only humans? Why only this dimension, this time, this reality? It seemed absurd, a cosmic disproportionality, as if the Creator had fabricated an infinite universe and then said, I'll put my favorite children on a rocky planet lost in an ordinary galaxy, and they'll be alone there. It didn't make sense. Tom had begun reading books he'd never allowed himself to read in his lifetime. Not blasphemous books. He still had his limits, but books about cosmology, the possibilities of the universe, and extraterrestrial civilizations. He'd bought a used telescope from a thrift store in Laramie, driving 3 hours just for it, hiding the purchase as if it were an act of infidelity. At night, he looked at the sky. He observed, he questioned, and sometimes, just sometimes, maybe once a month, he saw things he couldn't explain. Strange lights, impossible movements, speeds that defied the physics he'd learned in high school. More than once, he'd seen something that made him forget to breathe. But fear, always fear. Fear of being discovered observing unacceptable things. Fear of going crazy. Fear that this was real. Because if it were real, it meant that everything, Absolutely everything he had been taught was incomplete. It was a lie by omission, so he had stopped. He had put away the telescope. He had returned to his accounts, his calves, his safe repetition. But the curiosity had never disappeared. On that particular night, that December night when the lights went down, Tom was more vulnerable than he had been in months. Three things converged. First, a letter from the bank had arrived. It wasn't a final warning. Not yet. But the tone had changed. The manager wanted to talk in person. Thomas knew what that meant. His bad investments, his questionable business decisions, his age, all of this created a risk profile. The bank no longer wanted to carry that risk. Second, Elizabeth's death anniversary had passed 2 weeks ago. 15 years now, not 14. He had lost count by a whole year, which deeply disturbed him. How could you forget to count the years someone had been dead? What did this mean about his memory? About the importance he placed on her? Third, the night before, Tom had found an old box in the attic while searching for emergency blankets. In the box was Elizabeth's telescope. She too had been a sky watcher as a child. She had written notes in the margins of old star catalogs, notes he had never seen before. Notes that said things like, "Am I alone here?" and "There has to be more to it than this." Elizabeth had asked the same questions. Elizabeth had had the same doubts, and Elizabeth had died without answers. Tom had placed that antique telescope beside his bed that night, like a talisman, like a connection to her, like a question he was finally willing to ask aloud. Then came the impossibility, the instinctive call that made him get out of bed and go to the barn to check on the newborn calves in the dead of night. Something whispered, something called. He obeyed as if operated by remote control. And it was there, standing in the frozen pasture at a moment when his finances were collapsing, when the memory of his wife was tormenting him, when all his questions about God and the universe and meaning were at their highest. It was at that moment that the lights began to go out. As he walked toward those impossible lights, Thomas Blackwood experienced a strange clarity. It wasn't courage. It wasn't even resignation. It was the simple realization that he had reached a point of no return anyway. That his life had collapsed so completely financially, spiritually, emotionally, that there was truly nothing left to lose. The fear was still there. His heart was racing. His breathing was shallow. His fingers were tingling. All the classic signs of a body in panic. But his mind had made a decision that his body hadn't yet fully integrated. If that was madness, then so be it. At least it would be true madness instead of continuing to live this life that was already a form of insanity, an endless repetition of a broken pattern with no real purpose, no answers, no meaning. He walked. The buzzing grew louder, the lights pulsed, and Thomas Blackwood, widowed, broke, questioning, lonely Thomas Blackwood, left behind 59 years of conformity and walked into the unknown. The lights continued to descend as Tom walked across the frozen grass. The closer he got, the more his body screamed at him to stop. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His hands trembled. 50 meters away, the lights stabilized. They didn't quite land. They hovered about 2 meters above the ground, floating above the pasture. The humming faded, becoming a mechanical purr that vibrated through their chests. Tom stopped. His instinct finally won out over his curiosity. Those lights, he'd seen them before, more than once. Over the years, especially after Elizabeth's death, when he'd spend entire nights awake staring at the sky, strange lights that moved impossibly, that disappeared suddenly, that flickered as if they had an intelligence of their own, but never so close, never so direct, and never, absolutely never, so intentional. Because that was what scared Tom more than anything. The sudden knowledge that it was looking for him, that it was no coincidence, that on this particular night, this impossible thing had descended toward his farm, because it knew he would be there, because it knew he came, because it was coming for him. "This isn't happening," he muttered to himself, his voice rough after so many days without speaking to anyone. But it was. He knew it was. His fingers tingled, his heart raced. Pure adrenaline now. Not the adrenaline of the unknown, but the adrenaline of being hunted. For weeks, he had seen those lights in the distance. Always distant, always indifferent. He had constructed comfortable explanations. Drone, satellite, reflection, anything that would maintain the illusion of safety. But now, it was here, waiting. And the worst part of him, the part that had spent 14 years questioning God, the part that had kept Elizabeth's telescope like a talisman, that part was recognizing it as if a dormant memory were awakening. As if his body knew something his rational mind refused to accept. The lights changed color, green to blue to green again. The pattern was deliberate, communicative. Tom took a step back, then another. But he didn't run, and that was the most important thing. Despite every fiber of his body screaming to flee, despite the rush of adrenaline, despite the genuine fear knotting his stomach, he remained there, frozen between the desire to live and the need for answers. The lights watched him, and Thomas Blackwood, widowed, broke, questioning, finally realized the truth he had avoided for weeks as he watched the night sky. It had come looking for him. The question now was, why? The light began to descend even further, not quickly, slowly, with a deliberation that seemed almost gentle, as if giving Tom time to process, to accept, to be ready. The hum changed frequency again, this time higher pitched, closer to a musical tone than a mechanical one. Tom felt the Wyoming chill sink deeper into his bones. Or maybe it was fear. He couldn't tell anymore. When the light reached within a meter of the ground, something changed. The grass beneath it began to glow. It didn't reflect the light. The grass itself emitted a faint glow of its own, as if the sound frequency activated something in the plant's molecules. Tom had seen bioluminescence in documentaries. He had seen fireflies on his vacation in Florida 21 years ago. But this was different. This was intelligent. This was controlled. And that was impossible. He took another involuntary step back, his primal instinct finally beginning to overcome his curiosity. But then the light changed again. It returned to blue-green. The musical tone dropped, and that sense of menace, that predatory quality that had made him flinch, vanished completely, replaced by something Tom couldn't describe. Patience, perhaps, or understanding, as if it had sensed his fear and was deliberately calming him. Tom took a deep breath. His heart was still racing, but slightly more controlled now. And that's when he saw it. From the base of that light, from that impossible object hovering above the frozen pasture, a wave began to radiate. It wasn't wind. It wasn't displaced air. It was something more subtle, a ripple in space itself, like when you heat air over a stove and your vision distorts. But this was different because the air around it was freezing. The snow around the light should have been hardening in that extreme cold. Instead, it was melting. Not dramatically, not in flames or explosive vapor, but there was an area about 10 feet in diameter around the light where the snow was disappearing, where the frozen grass was breaking free, where tiny droplets of water formed impossible geometric patterns on the dark ground. Thomas Blackwood was witnessing something that completely defied the laws of physics he had learned. Localized heating, he thought desperately. Infrared radiation. Advanced technology can do that. But his inner voice knew he was lying again. Infrared didn't create visible ripples in the air. Infrared didn't make the grass glow. Infrared didn't make that sound. That musical tone that was now almost soothing despite its own irrationality. What Tom was witnessing wasn't advanced Earth technology. It was something fundamentally different. Something that operated on principles conventional physics couldn't explain. And worse, or better, depending on your perspective, Tom realized he knew it. That his body, his instincts, his very essence, recognized that this was genuinely other, genuinely alien in the most literal sense, from a different place, of a different origin. There was no rational explanation that worked anymore. Drone had been discarded when the object moved with such impossible fluidity. Helicopter had disappeared when there was no rotor noise. Hallucination had been eliminated when the snow began to melt in mathematically precise patterns. All that remained was the truth that Tom had avoided for weeks while staring at that old telescope of Elizabeth's. That was real, that was other, and that had been specifically looking for him. The lights pulsed once more, and this time Tom didn't flinch. His fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply transformed. It was no longer fear of the absolute unknown. It was fear mixed with wonder, with recognition, with that strange feeling of being in a place he'd hoped to be all his life, but had never consciously acknowledged. The snow continued to melt. The air continued to shimmer softly, and the question that had begun as why now morphed into something bigger. At that moment, Thomas Blackwood was certain of one thing, and one thing only. His life had been divided into before and after, and he was permanently on the after side. Tom couldn't simply remain still. His body needed to do something, anything, to process what was before him. So he began walking around the thing slowly with cautious movements as if he were approaching a wild animal that might attack at any moment. The light accompanied him. It didn't move aggressively. It didn't accelerate to intercept him. It simply rotated. That was the closest word Tom could think of, so that it remained directly in front of him no matter which way he moved, as if it were keeping its distance, respecting his space, but not letting him out of its sight. It could be remote control, he murmured, his voice sounding strange in the frigid air. Someone, somewhere, is controlling it from afar. Advanced technology, sophisticated military drone. It has to be, but he knew it was a lie. His voice only sounded desperate because the lies he was telling himself were crumbling in real time. Tom kept walking. He completed a nearly complete circle around the light, a safe distance of about 20 meters. The frozen snow crunched beneath his feet. His body tingled with a mix of cold and adrenaline. But there was nothing unusual from any angle. Nothing that could be explained as a trick of perspective or an optical illusion. It was just an impossible thing floating above his pasture, pulsing with that blue-green color that no earthly LED could replicate. It could be atmospheric reflection, he tried again. An optical phenomenon. It happens with auroras. It happens with rays refracted through ice crystals. It's just refraction. The color changed from teal to a deep purple, as if it were responding to his thoughts, as if it were saying, "No, Thomas, it's not refraction." Tom stopped walking. The geometric pattern he'd seen in the melted grass was now repeating itself in the air. Lines of pure light formed symbols that flashed in sequence. 3 times fast, pause, twice, pause, once. Something that looked like communication, code language. Tom recognized what he was seeing as significant. Even though he didn't understand the meaning, his body screamed for him to run back to the house. His heart was still racing. His lungs were burning from the freezing air. But his brain, the part of him that had spent 14 years questioning, the part that had read books on cosmology, that had regarded Elizabeth's telescope like a sacred artifact, his brain couldn't let go. He was witnessing something real, something that would change everything he knew about existence. And the scariest thing was that part of him, a part he couldn't name or understand, had been waiting for this his whole life. Tom took another step forward, then another, slowly reducing the distance from 20 meters to 15, to 12, to 10. The light kept changing color, purple to blue to green, to a color Tom had never seen before, something between silver and white, but with depth, as if it had many layers within it. The musical hum had transformed into something that was almost a voice, almost intelligible. "If you're dangerous," Tom said aloud, his first attempt at communication. "Why haven't you attacked already?" The light pulsed. And for the first time since that night began, Tom realized he'd asked a question, and that somehow he'd understood. He'd recognized the intention behind the words, even if he hadn't understood the words themselves. It was intelligent. It was conscious. It was trying to communicate. Tom forced himself to step back. 2 steps, 3, creating space again. But this time, it wasn't escape. It was just breathing, processing, trying to make sense of what his rational mind was failing to accept. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "You're a man living in Wyoming. You raise cattle. You pay bills. You live a normal life. Things like this don't happen to people like you." But it was happening. It was happening right there, just 10 meters away. Something that defied all his understanding of the universe. The light began to descend again slowly, deliberately, as if offering Tom the opportunity to escape if he wanted, as if respecting his agency, his choice, his ability to say no. And in that moment, Thomas Blackwood understood the most terrifying truth of all. He had no intention of saying no. Despite the fear, despite the need to escape, despite every rational explanation his desperate mind had tried to construct, he couldn't turn away from it, because something inside him, something older than 59 years, something that had been asking for answers for 14 years, had finally found what it was looking for. Denial was crumbling, rationalism was cracking, and Thomas Blackwood was about to be forced to accept that the universe was far vaster, far stranger, and far more purposeful than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. And no one could ever know. Because who in Wyoming would believe that a widowed rancher had spent a night with something from the sky? He would be alone with that knowledge forever. The light descended until it was only a meter above the ground. The musical tone changed again. It was now almost a recognizable melody, as if trying to create something the human mind could process. Tom remained 10 meters away, his lungs still burning, his entire body vibrating in a way he couldn't control. Then, something came out of the light. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a creature in the sense Tom had imagined in his wildest dreams. It was a shape, a silhouette, humanoid enough to be recognizable, but fundamentally different from anything on Earth. Transparent, made of light, and something else. Matter Tom couldn't name that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Tom felt his stomach drop. He tried to move. His feet wouldn't obey. It wasn't paralysis. His body simply refused, as if every fiber of his being recognized that he had reached a point of absolute truth, and that movement of any kind would shatter the fragile balance of that moment. The shape began walking towards him slowly, without apparent threat, but with absolute intention, with purpose. And with each step she took toward him, Tom felt something shifting inside his own chest, as if his heart were responding to the frequencies the creature was emitting. About a meter away, the shape stopped. And that's when Thomas Blackwood realized he wasn't hallucinating, that he wasn't crazy, that there was no lingering possibility that his brain was making this up, because he could feel the heat radiating from the form. He could feel the frequency traveling through the air. He could hear, not with his ears, but with something deeper, with some part of his consciousness that had no name. He could hear a voice that whispered soundlessly, and in that silent whisper, there was understanding. "Don't be afraid, Thomas." The words were unspoken. They hadn't reached his ears, but Thomas understood them with absolute clarity, as if they were implanted directly in his mind, as if that thing was speaking directly to his essence, his very deepest self. And that was all Tom needed to finally understand that everything, absolutely everything he had believed about reality, about possibility, about the limits of the universe, was completely irrevocably wrong. Tom fell to his knees, not out of weakness, not out of cowardice, but because his body had reached the limit of its ability to process what was before him. It was happening. This was real, and he no longer had the emotional or psychological resources to deny it. The shape leaned slightly toward him. The heat increased. The melody it emitted grew more complex, more beautiful. And Tom understood something in that moment that would redefine the rest of his life. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't there to hurt him. It was there because for the first time in his 59-year existence, Thomas Blackwood had finally become ready for something that had been waiting for him for a long time. But ready for what? The question burned in his chest. Because Thomas Blackwood was no one special. He was an ordinary widower, a farmer, a man whose finances were collapsing, a solitary questioner whom no one had ever considered worthy of cosmic attention. So why him? The shape extended what might be called an arm. It didn't touch Tom. It simply extended as an offering, as an invitation. And in that moment, Thomas Blackwood had to make the most important choice of his life. Accepting that the universe was fundamentally different from what he believed. Accepting that he was being offered something: knowledge, connection, transformation that most human beings would never receive. Accepting that his loneliness, his questioning, his existential crisis of the last 14 years had not been a coincidence, but rather an orchestration, or deny it. Run, lock yourself in your house, and spend the rest of your life trying to convince yourself that night had been a hallucination. Tom took a deep breath and slowly, his hands shaking uncontrollably, he reached out in response. As his human hand approached the translucent form, Tom felt something he couldn't describe. It wasn't pain. It wasn't pleasure. It was as if every cell in his body was being rescanned, reconfigured, reprogrammed for an entirely different reality. His mind screamed. His heart was pumping blood so fast he was sure he was going to have a heart attack. But he had no intention of stopping, because in that instant, as his hand reached out toward that impossible shape that had descended from the sky onto his Wyoming pasture, Thomas Blackwood finally grasped a truth that had been whispering in his soul since the day Elizabeth died, that he was ready to wake up, and everything. The loneliness, the pain, the loss, the questions, the sleepless nights, the old telescope, the letter from the bank, every moment of despair. It had all been preparation for this very moment. When Tom's fingers touched the translucent form, the sensation was electric, not pain, something more intense, as if every cell in his body was waking up simultaneously. His hand didn't burn, but tingled, as if it had been asleep for years and was now awakening. He tried to pull away but couldn't. Not because he was being pulled, but because his body refused to obey. Images exploded in his mind. These weren't his memories. They were the memories of others. Beings in worlds that didn't exist in any astronomy textbook. Crystal cities, red skies, and, in each image there was a sense of purpose, of mission, of cosmic intent, as old as the stars themselves. Then everything stopped. Tom yanked his hand back as if it had been burned by fire. His entire arm trembled. His chest rose and fell rapidly. Abduction, he thought, his brain in a state of complete panic. This is an abduction. I'm being marked. I'm being prepared. In the next few seconds, he's going to pull me into that thing and… Thomas. The voice came directly into his head. Not through his ears. Through something much deeper. Tom lowered his head, his entire body trembling. Every primal fiber of him screamed that he was being hunted, that he was being prepared for something horrible. Don't run away, the voice continued. And there was something about it that wasn't a threat. There was something that felt like understanding, patience with fear. Am I going to be abducted? Tom asked, his voice pure panic. Now? Are they going to take me? The messenger remained where he was. The light dimmed slightly. It didn't disappear, but it became less intense, as if he were adjusting his own presence to be less aggressive. There is no planned abduction, Thomas, but I understand why you feel this way. Your body is responding as it should with protection. Your mind is trying to categorize something it cannot categorize. Tom was breathing in gasps. His body was covered in sweat despite the extreme cold. His knees buckled, and he let himself fall to the ground, not out of weakness, but because his body could no longer process standing while going through this. Don't do that again, he murmured. Don't get in my head like that. There was a moment of silence. The messenger didn't move, but something changed. The frequency of the light lowered. The tone became softer, more restrained. I felt your compassion before, the being said. When you were far away, watching lights in the sky. You were curious, but also protective. You wanted to know, but also afraid. So, I approached slowly. I gave you time. I let you make choices. Tom lifted his head. The messenger was still there, still impossible, still defining every understanding of reality he had. But there was something different now about the way he looked at that shape. It wasn't any less frightening. But it was different. Why? Tom asked, his breathing still ragged. Why care about my fears? Why not just take me? Because you were chosen, not captured, the messenger replied. And there was a simplicity in that sentence that Tom recognized as truth. Because if you hadn't agreed to approach, if you had run, I would have let you go. Because free will is sacred in ways your mind doesn't yet fully comprehend. Tom remained kneeling on the frozen ground. Part of him still expected to be sucked upward, still expected to be abducted, still expected to be marked somehow for purposes he couldn't imagine. But another part, a part deeper than words, recognized the truth in those words. Where were you? Tom asked, his voice quieter now. When Elizabeth died, the messenger remained motionless. The light pulsed once. Where you needed me to be, he replied simply, and Tom understood, not completely, but enough to take his breath away, that the answer meant yes, that there was something there, something he couldn't fully process, but it was real. Tom and the messenger remained as they were for what could have been minutes or hours. Tom couldn't measure it. Time had become strange. The things around them seemed normal. The frozen grass, the stars above, the cold, but everything was tinged with a dreamlike quality, as if they were living in two realities simultaneously. I don't understand any of this, Tom finally muttered, more to himself than to the being in front of him. "No," the messenger agreed. "Not yet, but you will understand. Not the whole truth. Your human mind cannot contain the whole truth at once. It would destroy you. But enough. Enough for you to know why you were alone. Enough for you to know why the one you loved had to leave. Enough for you to know why at this very moment in Wyoming on an ordinary December night, you were worthy of the call." Tom stood slowly, his body still trembling, but more controlled now. Still scared, but beginning to adjust to the pattern of the new possibility. "What if I don't want to hear it?" he asked. "What if I run now, go back to my house, lock the door, and never mention this?" "Then you would be left alone," the messenger replied, "and you would live the rest of your life knowing that you had chosen ignorance over truth. You would live with that knowledge. Some choose this path. It is also valid." Tom took a deep breath. He looked around at his own farm, at the place that had been his prison 14 years ago, at the life that had become so small he'd forgotten there was a universe beyond it. And he realized he couldn't go back now, even if he wanted to. "Tell me," he finally said, "but slowly, because I still can't process that you're real." And as the messenger began to share the first fragments of a truth that would completely reconfigure Thomas Blackwood's existence, Tom finally understood that this night was not about abduction. It was about calling. The messenger remained still for a moment, as if carefully choosing where to begin. The light around him pulsed gently, and Tom realized that the rhythm was synchronized with his own breathing, as if the presence were adjusting to him. "You asked me where I was when Elizabeth died," the voice said inside his mind, gentle but clear. "The truth is, Thomas, I wasn't there, but others were." Tom frowned. "Others? You have never been alone, Thomas. No human being is. Every soul that walks the earth has guides, loving presences who accompany their journey from birth to death and beyond." Tom felt his chest tighten. "Guides? You're saying that? That there was someone with Elizabeth when she died?" "Yes. And there was someone with you every lonely night after you left. You couldn't see them, but they were there, sending subtle comfort, synchronicities, strength when you thought you had none." Tom shook his head, trying to process. But I felt abandoned. Completely abandoned. Because you were looking in the wrong places, Thomas. You were looking for God in heaven, for answers in church, for comfort in people who didn't know how to help. But the divine was always within you, and your guides were always around you, just waiting for you to be ready to notice them. Tom looked down at his hands, trembling slightly in the cold. "And you? Who are you?" The form glowed more softly. "I am a messenger, a helper, just like your guides, but in a different form. I came physically because you needed to see, to touch, to know with absolute certainty that the universe is vast, and that you are not alone in it." "Whose messenger?" There was a pause, and then, "Of the one you call Jesus." Tom's world came to a complete standstill. "Jesus. You're saying Jesus sent you?" "Yes. I assist in his mission. There are many of us beings from different worlds, dimensions, forms, who assist Jesus in his work of reconnecting willing souls with divine truth." Tom felt his legs go weak again. But Jesus, he lived 2,000 years ago. How could he? Jesus is not limited to a body, Thomas. He has ascended. He exists in forms your physical mind cannot fully comprehend. And his mission continues, not just on earth, but on many worlds. And we, his helpers, help guide those who are ready to awaken. Tom covered his face with his hands. Decades of Methodist doctrine, of images of Jesus seated on a distant throne awaiting final judgment, all crumbled before this much greater, much more active, much more present truth. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why me? I'm just a farmer. Nobody special. You chose yourself, Thomas." His voice held such love that Tom felt tears burning. Years of questioning. Years of looking up at the sky and wondering if he was alone. Years of curiosity, suppressed by fear. All of it was your soul asking for this encounter. And when a soul asks with true sincerity, Jesus answers, sometimes through unseen guides, sometimes through us. Tom wiped his eyes, looking at the messenger. "Elizabeth, did she have guides too?" "Yes, and she still has them. Because death is not the end, Thomas. It is transformation. She continues her journey in another form, in another place. And you will meet again. Souls who truly love each other always meet again. Tom sobbed. 14 years of thinking he'd lost her forever. She sees you, Thomas. Not in the way you imagine, but yes, she follows your journey. And she is celebrating this moment because she always knew you would get here. Tom felt something loosen inside him, a weight he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten what it was like to live without it. "What now?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What happens now?" The messenger shifted slightly, and Tom realized it was creating more space, as if it knew Tom needed distance to process what was coming next. "Now, Thomas, I need to tell you something few understand about why I came physically tonight, but do not appear to everyone. About why your soul was ready now, and others are not yet. About the most sacred law in the universe." Tom took a deep breath, feeling like he was about to hear something that would change everything again. "I'm listening. There is a law that governs everything in the universe," the messenger began, his voice soft but firm in Tom's mind. "Something so fundamental that even Jesus respects it." "Absolutely. We call it free will." Tom nodded slowly. "The church talks about that. About choice." "Yes, but not as it should be taught. Free will isn't just about choosing between good and evil, Thomas. It's about the sacred right of every soul to walk its own path, to awaken in its own time, to ask its own questions, and arrive at its own answers." The messenger paused, and Tom sensed his next words would be crucial. "That's why I don't appear to everyone. That's why Jesus doesn't manifest himself in undeniable physical form to every person on earth. Not because some are special and others are not, but because forcing an awakening before its time is not love. It's rape." Tom frowned. But people suffer. They're lost, alone like I was. Why not help? Every soul has its own guides, Thomas. Each one receives synchronicities, small awakenings, subtle whispers. But the great awakening, like the one you are having now, only happens when the soul has reached a point of evolution where contact will not cause harm, but rather growth. Tom thought of his neighbors, the Methodist community, everyone who still believed Earth was the only planet with life. And when will they wake up? Some souls awaken quickly. Others need time, multiple lives, multiple experiences, millennia of evolution. And that's okay, Thomas. There are no late or early souls, just different rhythms. And everyone eventually comes to the same understanding. Everyone returns to the source. Tom felt something calm inside him. It wasn't his responsibility to save everyone. "So what do I do now? Just pretend nothing happened?" "No." The voice was gentle but firm. "You live differently. You live authentically. You live with the truth you now know. And when the right people notice this change in you, they will ask. And when they ask, you share. But only when they ask. Don't force. Don't push. Don't judge those who don't see it yet." Tom imagined trying to tell someone about this. The disbelief, the accusations of madness. But it's going to be hard seeing people stuck in the same limiting beliefs. "It will be the hardest thing you've ever done," the messenger agreed, "because you will have knowledge that others don't have, and the human ego loves to feel superior. But Thomas, listen well, your awakening doesn't make you better than anyone else. It makes you responsible in a different way." "Responsible for what?" "To live with compassion. To look upon those who still sleep not with arrogance but with love. Because you've been there. You spent 59 years sleeping too. And something divine grace, your own soul work, perfect timing allowed you to wake up. But that doesn't make you superior. It makes you a servant of love." The words settled in Tom like seeds in fertile soil. "So I just live and trust that everyone will awaken in their own time." "Exactly. You shine your light, and those who are ready will be naturally drawn to you, not because you've convinced them, but because they recognize something in you that their own souls are searching for." Tom took a deep breath. "And Elizabeth, can I move on without guilt?" "Not only can, you must. Living in guilt doesn't honor her or you. Living fully, loving again, if the opportunity arises, shining your light that honors her memory." That honors the love you shared? Tom felt fresh air fill his lungs as if for the first time in 14 years. The messenger began to glow more brightly, and Tom knew the encounter was coming to an end. "Wait," he said quickly. "When will I see you again?" "You won't. At least not in this physical form. My mission was to awaken you. Now you have your own guides who will continue to assist you, but I will not abandon you. I will only guide you in more subtle ways. What if I forget? What if I wake up tomorrow and think it was a dream?" The messenger reached out what felt like a hand touching Tom's chest, not physically, but energetically. Tom felt warmth spread throughout his body. "You will not forget. This night is etched in your soul, and whenever you doubt, whenever you feel alone, close your eyes and remember you are a child of the Creator. You are never alone. You have loving guides all around you, and you are loved beyond comprehension." Tom felt the presence beginning to dissolve, the light growing dimmer. "Thank you," he whispered, "for coming, for choosing me, for showing me the truth." "You chose yourself, Thomas," your soul asked. "Jesus listened and I came. Now go and live. Shine, love, and trust in the divine timing of every soul, including yours." And then, as he had come, the messenger disappeared. The light was gone. The humming ceased. Tom stood alone in the frozen pasture under the endless stars. But for the first time in 14 years, he didn't feel alone. Because now, he knew the truth. He had never been. Thomas Blackwood spent 14 years believing he was alone. 14 years without realizing that loving presences were all around him, patiently waiting for him to raise his consciousness enough to recognize them. And that is the deeper truth this story reveals. Your guides have always been there, but you only notice them when you raise your vibration. Loneliness, fear, resentment, pain. These are low frequencies that create a dense fog between you and the love that surrounds you. It's like trying to hear a soft melody while there's a roar all around you. The music is there. You just can't hear it through the noise. But when you begin to consciously choose thoughts of gratitude, peace, love, compassion, when you forgive, when you open yourself to greater possibilities, your vibration rises. And in that rise, the fog begins to dissipate, and you finally realize you were never alone. Your spirit guides are not distant and indifferent beings. They serve the divine light. They are always available to assist your evolution. But they absolutely respect your free will. They don't interfere. They don't force. They simply wait with infinite love for you to be ready to perceive them. And when you raise your frequency, when you finally tune into the same radio station where they operate, the synchronicities begin, the signs appear, the guidance flows, not because they arrive, but because you're finally ready to receive. The messenger who visited Tom that night did not come because Tom was special. It came because Tom's soul had reached a frequency where contact was possible without causing harm. Years of questioning, curiosity, and sincere seeking, all of it had gradually raised his vibration to the point where the veil could be lifted. And Jesus, who sent that messenger, continues his work, not just on earth, throughout creation, through helpers from many worlds, in many ways, all serving the same light, all guiding ready souls back home. But here's what few understand. Raising your vibration isn't about becoming pure or perfect. It's about becoming conscious, about choosing love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, gratitude over complaining, connection over separation. It's about recognizing that the divine isn't just up there, it's within you. And when you reconnect with this inner divine essence, you automatically reconnect with the guides who have always been orbiting around you, waiting. And the responsibility of those who awaken, it's not about converting, it's not about convincing. It's simply about continuing to raise your own vibration, living authentically, shining naturally, and trusting that those who are ready will feel your light and come forward on their own. Because every soul has its own sacred time, and forcing someone to awaken before their time is not love. So reflect. How many times have you dismissed signs because your vibration was too low to recognize them? How many synchronicities have you ignored because you were mired in fear or anger? How many times have your guides tried to reach you, but you were tuned into frequencies of pain that made it impossible to perceive them? They never abandoned you. You just weren't on the right frequency to notice them. And now begin. Consciously choose to elevate. Not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently, thought by thought, choice by choice, moment by moment. And watch. Watch the synchronicities begin to appear. Watch the guidance flow. Watch your life change. Not because your guides have finally arrived, but because you finally learned to realize they've always been there. Serving the divine light available to help your evolution, waiting with infinite love for you to be ready. What about you? Are you ready to elevate? Have you realized that perhaps your loneliness isn't abandonment, but simply an inability to tune into the frequency where love operates? Have you considered that your guides are trying to reach you, but you're vibrating too low to perceive them? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share your journey of elevation. Perhaps your story will help another soul begin to tune in. To go deeper in these teachings about raising your vibration, reconnecting with your divine essence, and learning to perceive the constant assistance of your guides, check out our book, Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence. It is available in the pinned comment. If this story sparked something in you, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell for more stories about raising consciousness, reconnecting with spirit guides, and the divine love that has always been available. It is possible. Leave a thanks a lot in the comments. This helps us continue to raise collective consciousness, one story at a time, or become a channel member to directly support the creation of content that serves the light and helps the evolution of those who are ready. Remember, your guides never abandoned you. You were just tuned into the wrong frequency. Raise your vibration. Choose love. Choose gratitude. Choose forgiveness. And watch the magic begin, because they've always been there serving the divine light, hoping you were ready to realize. Thank you for elevating with us until the next story, and may your frequency always be one of love.